We stand before the Great Pyramid of Giza, a colossal monument carved from stone, towering above the sands like a silent sentinel of time. For centuries, we've been told it was the work of Pharaoh Khufu, a testament to the power and vision of ancient Egypt's fourth dynasty. Textbooks declare it a tomb, a royal achievement of copper tools, manpower, and divine command. But what if that story is wrong? What if the pyramid so precise, so immense, so enduring was never built by the Egyptians at all? What if it is not the crown jewel of Egyptian architecture, but a relic inherited from a world we've forgotten? A world that left no written language, no name, only geometry etched into limestone and secrets sealed beneath the surface. The Great Pyramid stands not as a monument to a known past, but as a mystery whose builders may not be the people we've always believed. If this monument was not the work of Khufu, then who shaped it, and why have their voices been erased from history? If Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid, everything we've been taught about the origins of civilization begins to unravel. The carefully constructed narrative of human progress from primitive tools to towering empires fractures at its core. The pyramid is not just a structure. It's a cornerstone of our historical timeline. To remove it from its place in Egyptian history is to pull a thread that unravels the entire tapestry. It means the rise of complex architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and engineering didn't begin with the pharaohs. It began long before, in a time we've never recorded. A time when knowledge existed without explanation, when someone or something understood the earth, the heavens, and the laws of nature in ways we still struggle to replicate. If the Great Pyramid isn't Egyptian, then who were its builders? And more importantly, why have they been written out of history? To question this is to question the story of us, all of us, and the version of history we've accepted without doubt. For those who gaze upon the arid expanse of the Sahara today, it is difficult to imagine that this vast desert was once a paradise of life. But beneath the silence of the dunes and the heat-shimmered horizon lies evidence of a forgotten world, a time when the Sahara was green, fertile, and alive. Between 7000 and 4000 BCE, a period now known as the African Humid Period, North Africa, bore no resemblance to the lifeless landscape we see today. Instead, it was a region of rainfall and abundance, dotted with lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests that stretched across what is now endless sand. This was not a minor climate fluctuation. It was a massive and sustained shift, the result of changes in the Earth's orbit and axial tilt, which drew the monsoon belt further north and drenched the Sahara with seasonal rains. Satellite imaging has revealed long-lost riverbeds buried beneath the desert, paths where water once carved through the land. Ancient lakebeds, now dry and cracked, show signs of what were once vast inland seas, teeming with aquatic life. Even today, when the wind pulls back the sand in certain places, it exposes the fossilized remains of crocodiles, hippos, and fish species that could not survive in today's hyper-arid environment. This was not just a transformation of nature, but of human possibility. Where there is water, life flourishes, and so too does culture. The African Humid Period created conditions that could sustain large populations. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of human settlements scattered throughout what is now desert stone tools, hearths, pottery shards, and burial sites. These were not isolated tribes eking out an existence. They were communities sustained by freshwater lakes and grasslands, and they thrived in numbers and complexity that would have seemed impossible just a few centuries later. Rock art etched into cave walls during this era tells the story vividly. In places like the Tassili Najjar Plateau in Algeria and the Gilf Kebir region of Egypt, ancient artists painted scenes of daily life, herds of antelope and cattle grazing along riverbanks, hunters armed with spears, figures swimming in what were once vast open lakes. These images are not the markings of a primitive people. They are evidence of social cohesion, of cultural memory, and of an environment radically different from the one we know. When we speak of the Sahara, the mind conjures images of parched dunes, unbroken horizons, and blistering heat, a place where life clings only to the hardiest of forms. But during the African humid period, this landscape was transformed into an African Eden. The vast stretches of sand we see today were once a mosaic of interconnected ecosystems. Freshwater lakes shimmered under cloud-laced skies, rivers coursed through valleys now lost beneath dunes, and savannas teemed with life, both wild and human. The Green Sahara wasn't just a wetter version of a desert. It was an entirely different world. These lakes were not shallow puddles, but deep bodies of water stretching hundreds of kilometers across. Lake Mega Chad, now a fraction of its former size, was once the largest freshwater lake on Earth, larger than today's Caspian Sea. It served as a magnet for biodiversity, drawing animals from across the continent. Elephants, giraffes, lions, hippos, and crocodiles roamed freely, their movements dictated by the changing seasons and the rise and fall of water levels. Herds of gazelle and antelope grazed the open plains, while birds of every shape and color flocked to the wetlands. This was not a land of scarcity, it was a land of abundance. The vegetation mirrored this richness. Grasses grew tall across rolling hills. Acacia trees clustered near water sources, offering shade to both animals and humans. Palms and reeds grew along the lakeshores, suggesting not only water, but stability conditions under which human communities could thrive, settle, and eventually evolve. Archaeobotanical evidence confirms the presence of various edible plants and wild grains, the kind of naturally occurring food sources that would support sedentary lifestyles, and even early agriculture. This lushness wasn't isolated to a single region. Across what are now Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Niger, and Algeria, paleolakes and paleocanals, ancient dried-up waterways, show that much of North Africa was once habitable. Fossils and sediment cores confirm long-term moisture, not just short rainy bursts. In short, this wasn't a passing phase. It was a sustained climatic period lasting millennia. It created the foundation for complex life, both ecological and human. If such a vibrant environment once existed where today only silence remains, then what else might have existed here? Could the fertile Sahara have supported something more than scattered tribes and migrating herds? Could it have been home to a civilization capable of feats we've long assumed were born only in the Nile Valley? The Green Sahara didn't just nurture wildlife, it fostered human life. Where today we see unbroken stretches of barren sand, there once stood villages, hearths, burial grounds, and the quiet order of human routine. Archaeologists have uncovered a wealth of evidence suggesting that during the African humid period, the Sahara was dotted with thriving settlements, sustained not by chance, but by the deliberate use of the region's resources. These were not temporary camps of nomadic wanderers. They were organized communities that lived, worked, and evolved for generations. Excavations at sites such as Nabda, Playa in southern Egypt, and Uin Mahugig in Libya reveal clear signs of complex social behavior. At Nabda Playa, circular structures made from megalithic stones suggest both communal gathering and astronomical awareness. These structures are over 7,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by millennia. Their alignment with the solstices implies not only that their builders were sedentary, but that they tracked celestial movements, likely for agricultural or ritual purposes. This level of planning and execution indicates a depth of knowledge far beyond mere survival. Pottery fragments found across the Sahara further support the presence of permanent or semi-permanent settlements. Some of these ceramics are intricately decorated, bearing patterns and marks that suggest aesthetic traditions and cultural identity. Their uniformity across wide regions also hints at trade networks and shared customs, evidence of interaction between groups over hundreds of miles. These were not isolated bands of hunter-gatherers, but people who communicated, traded, and perhaps cooperated across vast distances. Burial sites from this era tell us even more. Graves often contained carefully arranged bodies covered with red ochre or accompanied by grave goods, beads, tools, and even animal bones. In Yuan Mahagig, a mummified child was discovered, preserved with techniques far more advanced than one might expect for the time. The care taken in death suggests reverence, spiritual beliefs, and social structures where the community mourned and remembered. These weren't transient people, they were rooted, both in place and in purpose. Tools left behind: microliths, polished stone axes. Grinding stones reveal a deep understanding of the environment. These people processed grain, hunted with strategy, and adapted to changing landscapes. They were skilled, resilient, and intelligent. And most notably, they lived in a time and place now almost completely erased from the popular story of civilization. When words fade and monuments crumble, images etched in stone often remain. Across the now desolate Sahara, rock art tells the story of a forgotten world, one not dry and dead, but living and lush. In caves, on cliff faces, and scattered across plateaus, thousands of petroglyphs and pictographs speak in silence, offering us a visual record of life in the green Sahara. They show us not only what people saw, but how they lived, what they valued, and the environment that shaped them. Perhaps the most striking feature of this rock art is its vibrant depiction of animals, especially those that no longer roam these barren lands. Herds of antelope, giraffes, ostriches, hippos, and elephants appear again and again, suggesting that these species were not rare or symbolic, but part of everyday reality. These weren't stylized religious icons. They were observational renderings of familiar sights. Hunters are shown mid-pursuit with bows and arrows, sometimes surrounded by their dogs, a level of realism that indicates both practical knowledge and artistic skill. In regions like the Tassili Noshur and the Gilf Khyber Plateau. In southwestern Egypt, entire galleries of prehistoric art have been discovered. Many of these paintings date back as far as 9,000 years ago. They show people swimming, dancing, milking cattle, or paddling in canoes, scenes that are impossible to reconcile with the current landscape. Today, these same regions are some of the driest places on Earth, but the art insists otherwise. It insists that water was once plentiful and life abundant. Water sources themselves are also depicted: rivers, lakes, and springs, often surrounded by vegetation and wildlife. These aren't abstract representations. They're detailed enough to suggest real locations, known and used by the people who carved them. Some even include seasonal elements, such as animals associated with rainy or dry periods. This observational accuracy further confirms that these communities had a deep understanding of their environment, living in rhythm with the cycles of nature. What's more, these artworks aren't limited to isolated tribes. Similar motifs, styles, and themes appear across vast distances, from Libya to Chad, suggesting a shared cultural tradition that spanned a massive region. These were not disconnected bands of survivors. They were participants in a broader network of civilization. A civilization that thrived in a Sahara so different, it's almost unimaginable today. The vision of a green Sahara teeming with life is more than a romantic image. It's a radical key that may unlock one of history's greatest enigmas. Who truly built the Great Pyramid? If the Sahara was once fertile, abundant, and populated by organized human communities, then it becomes entirely plausible, perhaps even likely, that an early civilization, now forgotten, could have had both the resources and knowledge to attempt monumental construction on a scale we thought impossible for their time. The basic requirements for such an endeavor: food, water, stable climate, population density, and access to suitable stone, were all present during the African humid period. Settlements along what are now ancient dried lake beds and vanished rivers would have formed interconnected nodes of trade, culture, and possibly governance. These people had the means to organize labor, plan long-term projects, and develop increasingly complex technologies as seen in their tools, megalithic structures, and astronomical alignments. But more crucial than physical resources is the shift in mindset such an environment allows. In a land where survival is not a daily battle, people gain the freedom to observe, imagine, and build. They begin to mark time by the movement of stars. They begin to align their lives with natural cycles. They begin to reach for permanence. Monuments arise not just to shelter, but to speak, to preserve memory, to honor ancestors, to mirror the heavens. The pyramid is not simply a structure, it is a worldview carved into stone. And such a worldview could only take shape in a land not ruled by sandstorms, but by stability. What if the people of the Green Sahara weren't just pastoralists or tribes clustered around oases, but the early remnants of a civilization capable of large-scale organization? What if, as the climate shifted and the land began to dry, they migrated eastward toward the Nile, bringing with them traditions, myths, and a memory of what they had already built? In this light, the pyramids of Giza are not the miraculous leap of Old Kingdom Egypt, but the final echo of something older, a legacy passed down, inherited rather than invented. This doesn't erase Egyptian history. It deepens it. It suggests that the pharaohs may not have built on a blank slate, but atop a forgotten foundation, one shaped by rain, green valleys, and a people who watched the stars long before the first dynasty rose. We begin not with a myth, but with a question etched into limestone. The great Sphinx of Giza, long considered an icon of ancient Egypt, sits low in a shallow trench at the edge of the Giza Plateau. Its body is elongated and feline, its face eroded and enigmatic. It is carved directly from bedrock, facing the east as the sun rises, immense, silent, timeless. Egyptologists have long assigned its creation to Pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BCE, but in the 1990s, a geologist trained not in the reading of hieroglyphs, but in the reading of stone stood before the monument and saw something very different. That geologist was Dr. Robert Schoch of Boston University. Unlike traditional Egyptologists, Schoch approached the Sphinx not with the assumptions of dynastic chronology, but with the eyes of a physical scientist. He wasn't looking for royal inscriptions or architectural parallels. He was looking at the stone itself, how it weathered, how it fractured, how it aged. Schoch observed something that stood in stark contrast to the accepted narrative. The enclosure surrounding the Sphinx, the rectangular trench from which the statue was carved, bears deep vertical channels and rounded, undulating surfaces. These erosional features, Schoch argued, were not the result of wind and sand, as traditionally claimed. Instead, they were consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. Wind erosion typically creates horizontal striations, sharp, linear, and abrasive. But the Sphinx enclosure shows smoothed contours, vertical grooves, and softened edges. To a geologist, these are unmistakable indicators of water, not a single flash flood, but centuries of steady rain. This raises an immediate and significant problem. Egypt has been arid for the past 5,000 years. The only time the Giza Plateau experienced significant rainfall was during the African humid period, which ended around 4000 BC, thousands of years before the reign of Khufu or any of the pyramid-building dynasties. If Schoch's interpretation is correct, then the Sphinx cannot have been carved in 2500 BCE. It must predate the Old Kingdom by millennia. This is not a small adjustment. It does not shift history by a few centuries. It rewrites the entire narrative of civilization's early development. It suggests that monumental stone architecture on a scale previously thought to begin in Egypt's 4th dynasty may have originated in a forgotten epoch when the Sahara was green and rainfall sculpted the land. To understand the implications, we must examine the stone more closely. The Giza Plateau is composed of layers of limestone formed from ancient seabeds. These layers vary in hardness and quality, which affects how they weather over time. The body of the Sphinx is carved from softer strata, while the surrounding enclosure includes harder, more erosion-resistant layers. And yet, it is precisely the walls of the enclosure, those more resistant layers, that show the most dramatic, water-worn features. For water to have sculpted this stone so deeply, it would have needed to fall consistently over a long period, likely centuries, if not millennia. Furthermore, the erosional features are not limited to isolated sections. They appear across multiple surfaces of the enclosure, creating a cohesive pattern. There are no tool marks consistent with post-carving modification or reshaping. The damage is not decorative or symbolic. It is natural, and it is ancient. Critics of Schock's theory argue that the erosion could have come from pooling water or sporadic flooding. But such explanations do not align with the observed patterns. Pooling water typically erodes horizontally through sheet wash. Flash floods cause scouring at the base of walls. But here, we see high vertical channels, smoothed edges along multiple elevations, and consistent depth gradients. These features are best explained by rainfall running down the rock face repeatedly over time, behavior typical of a climate very different from today's Sahara. Schock's analysis went further. He compared the weathering of the Sphinx enclosure to nearby 4th Dynasty structures, the Valley Temple and the Mortuary Temple of Khufu. These temples were built using massive limestone blocks quarried directly from the Sphinx trench. These blocks show sharp corners, angular surfaces, and little to no evidence of water erosion. This contrast suggests a sequence. The Sphinx and its enclosure were already eroded by rain when the temples were constructed from its quarried stone. In other words, the monument was old, possibly already ancient, when the builders of the 4th Dynasty arrived. No hieroglyphic inscriptions exist on the Sphinx itself. It carries no cartouche, no statement of purpose, no dedication. For a culture that carved their kings' names onto nearly everything, from temple lintels to modest tombs, this absence is not easily dismissed. Khufu, like other pharaohs, left detailed inscriptions elsewhere, but not here. The association of Khufu with the Sphinx rests largely on proximity and assumption, not direct evidence. So what happens when we remove the name of Khufu from the Sphinx? What's left is a monument of unknown origin, bearing the scars of a climate long vanished. A work of monumental scale and sophistication, weathered by rain in a land that has not seen such rainfall for over 7,000 years. This would place its origin well before the known rise of dynastic Egypt, before the earliest cities of Mesopotamia, before agriculture was practiced widely across the Nile Valley. It would suggest that some culture, now vanished, carved a monument of astonishing ambition and purpose in a time we currently label as prehistoric. Such a proposal may seem radical, but it does not stand alone. Across the world, sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to around 9600 BCE, challenge our assumptions about when complex society emerged. There too, we find massive stonework, precise alignments, and no trace of writing, just like the Sphinx. Returning to Giza, one might ask, could wind and sand really not produce the same erosional effects? Wind erosion does affect limestone, especially when loaded with sand particles. But it creates sharp grooves, not rounded channels. It ablates corners rather than smoothing them. It etches horizontally, following the path of airflow. The Sphinx enclosure does not fit this profile. The weathering seen here flows downward, not across. It is the fingerprint of gravity and water, not air and dust. Another counter-argument is that the enclosure may have held standing water, perhaps from Nile flooding. But the geological elevation of the site makes this unlikely, and there is no sedimentary evidence of silt or deposition layers that would accompany such floods. The erosion is on vertical surfaces, not floors indicating runoff, not stagnation. Schoch was not the first to notice these anomalies. In the 1980s, John Anthony West, an independent researcher and writer, proposed that the Sphinx showed signs of water weathering inconsistent with Egypt's known climate. It was West who brought the site to Schoch's attention, hoping for scientific validation of the visual clues. Schoch initially approached the theory skeptically, but after conducting multiple on-site investigations and comparisons with other weathered rock formations, he concluded the evidence was compelling. In subsequent years, ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed possible cavities beneath the Sphinx. While their nature remains speculative, some interpret them as chambers, perhaps part of an earlier complex or structure. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has largely downplayed these findings, attributing them to natural fissures. Access to certain areas remains restricted, and few excavations have been permitted in the immediate vicinity of the monument. The debate has stirred strong opinions within Egyptology. Many scholars reject the early dating theory as unscientific or speculative. They argue that it undermines decades of carefully constructed chronology. But others point out that historical science must adapt to physical evidence. If stone tells a different story than texts, it is not the stone that must yield. This brings us to a critical point in historical interpretation: interdisciplinary scrutiny. Egyptology, as a discipline, is built largely on written records, royal lists, and cultural artifacts. But geology is not concerned with dynasties. It does not care for king lists or architectural styles. It examines erosion, sediment, and time. When two fields disagree, it becomes necessary to evaluate which form of evidence holds greater temporal certainty. In this case, the rocks do not lie. They bear the physical memory of the climate, and that memory contradicts the official story. What are the implications of accepting a pre-dynastic origin for the Sphinx? First, it means that an unknown culture existed in North Africa during the African humid period with the knowledge, manpower, and motivation to create colossal stone monuments. Second, it means that this culture either disappeared entirely or was absorbed into what later became dynastic Egypt, its legacy forgotten, overwritten, or deliberately erased. Finally, it suggests that our model of human societal development is incomplete, that civilization may not have emerged linearly, but cyclically, rising and falling in response to climatic shifts and natural catastrophes. The Sphinx, then, becomes more than a monument. It becomes a marker, both in time and in mystery. It raises not just geological questions, but civilizational ones. What was this early culture trying to express? Why did they carve a hybrid figure, part lion, part human, with such enduring intent? And if the Sphinx is older than Egypt, what else on the Giza Plateau might be? To date, no definitive answer has been reached. The mainstream chronology remains dominant in textbooks and museum placards. The theory of rainfall-induced weathering is often labeled fringe, despite its basis in observable data. But the stone does not retract its testimony. It stands open to the wind, bearing the grooves of an ancient rain dot, and so the Great Sphinx sits, weathered and watching. A monument not just of stone, but of doubt. A question in limestone, carved in a time we cannot yet define. In the vast and enduring landscape of ancient Egypt, no figure looms larger than the pharaoh. Kingship was not only a position of political power, but a divine institution rooted in order, cosmic balance, and eternal remembrance. From temples and tombs to stelae and statues, the pharaohs stamped their names into stone as acts of legacy, authority, and immortality. It is through these inscriptions that Egypt's dynastic past is traced. Every monument had a voice. Every structure had a signature. And yet, standing at the heart of one of the greatest architectural feats in human history, the Great Pyramid of Giza, there is silence. No hieroglyphs adorn its walls. No cartouche marks the name of its builder. No text declares the motive behind its construction, its purpose, or its date. For a monument that required unprecedented labor, planning, and precision, the absence of authorship is difficult to reconcile. And the same mystery surrounds its eternal companion, the Great Sphinx. Carved from bedrock, massive in scale, and aligned with celestial patterns, the Sphinx too remains mute. It bears no record of its creator, no dedication, no claim of ownership. This silence, in a civilization defined by its writing, is not incidental. It is a pattern worth examining. Traditional Egyptology attributes the Great Pyramid to Pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty, ruling around 2550 BC. This attribution is largely based on historical context, location, and most notably, a single piece of indirect evidence: a red ochre inscription discovered in the upper relieving chambers of the pyramid, where the name Khufu appears. But this name is not carved into a grand wall or placed within public view. It is painted in crude script on a block above the king's chamber, in an area not intended to be seen. Some researchers believe this was the work of a quarry crew marking delivery. Others have raised more skeptical possibilities, including the idea that the inscription may have been added during restoration work in the 19th century. It is notable that the rest of the pyramid, millions of blocks, thousands of internal surfaces, contains no other mention of Khufu, no artistic flourishes, no religious invocations, no symbolic narrative carved in stone. Compare this with Khufu's Valley Temple nearby, where statues and inscriptions honor his reign, or the tombs of lesser nobles, where walls are covered floor to ceiling with names, titles, and stories. Why would the greatest construction effort of the ancient world, the only remaining wonder of the ancient world, remain nameless? This question becomes more pressing when considering the cultural role of inscriptions in ancient Egypt. Hieroglyphs were not decorative, they were sacred. To inscribe one's name on stone was to ensure continuity in the afterlife. Monuments were places of spiritual reinforcement, designed to echo the power and legitimacy of the pharaoh forever. And yet, in the Great Pyramid, that echo is absent. The walls do not speak, they do not pray, they do not proclaim. They only stand. The Sphinx is equally mysterious. Traditional scholarship assigns it to Khufu's son, largely based on proximity to his pyramid and similarities in artistic style. But again, no inscription confirms this. There is no cartouche bearing Khufu's name on the Sphinx itself. The face, though often claimed to resemble Khufu's statues, has undergone erosion and damage, and comparisons remain subjective. The surrounding temples built from quarried stone of the Sphinx enclosure are more clearly linked to Khufu. But the monument they frame, arguably the more significant of the two, makes no such claim. This absence stands in sharp contrast to later Egyptian behavior. Ramses II, reigning more than a millennium after Khufu, carved his name across countless sites, some of which he did not even build. His legacy is a reminder that pharaohs sought eternal recognition. They did not hide behind anonymity. Even modest structures were marked. Why then would Khufu remain silent in the face of his greatest architectural achievement? It's worth noting that the attribution of major monuments based solely on indirect evidence is rare in Egyptology. Most pharaohs leave clear, unmistakable claims. From cartouches etched in temple lintels to dedicatory texts on obelisks, authorship was not left to speculation. Even when inscriptions have been lost, fragments remain. But at the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, the story begins with an absence. This absence has led some researchers to question whether these monuments were truly built during the time of Khufu or Khufu, or whether they were inherited. The idea of inheritance in ancient architecture is not without precedent. In other cultures, rulers have taken over structures built by predecessors or even entirely different peoples, repurposing them for new functions while leaving their original builders unnamed or forgotten. Could the same have occurred here? Supporting this possibility is the inventory stela, a lesser-known artifact discovered near the Sphinx. It dates to the 26th dynasty, over 1,000 years after the 4th dynasty, and records a statement attributed to Khufu himself. In the text, Khufu is said not to have built the Sphinx, but to have discovered it buried in sand and ordered its restoration. He also speaks of temples already existing in the area, again suggesting that what we associate with his reign may have predated him. Egyptologists often dismiss this text as later fabrication or political myth-making, but it raises a legitimate question. If even later Egyptians believed the monuments were older than Khufu, might that belief have had some basis? Some argue that the absence of inscriptions can be explained by the function of the pyramid. If it was purely a tomb, its interior may have been designed for containment, not expression. But this does not align with Egyptian burial traditions. Tombs were texts. They were places of ritual and resurrection, full of invocations, instructions, and sacred art. Even the pyramids of later dynasties, though smaller in scale, are richly inscribed. The Great Pyramid's silence remains anomalous. Moreover, if the Great Pyramid was a royal tomb, where is the body? No mummy, sarcophagus, or burial equipment was ever found in the king's chamber. The chamber itself is stark, no hieroglyphs, no decoration, just granite blocks fitted with precision. The same is true for the queen's chamber and the subterranean chamber below. These are not rooms designed for royal commemoration. They are spaces of exact geometry, devoid of religious content. The absence of textual and ceremonial markers leaves the structure's purpose open to reinterpretation. Critically, the notion that Khufu built the pyramid is not supported by contemporary records. The only written reference to Khufu that survives from his own time is the so-called Westcar Papyrus, which contains stories about his court and magicians, none of which mention a pyramid. Later records, such as those by Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, attribute the pyramid to Khufu, but they are far removed in time and based on oral tradition. In fact, Herodotus describes Khufu as a tyrant, detested by his people, a characterization that does not match the reverence typically shown to pyramid builders. If he was indeed responsible for the monument, the disconnect is notable. The possibility remains that the absence of inscription was intentional, that whoever built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx did not want to be known. But this would imply a very different cultural or philosophical framework than that of dynastic Egypt. It suggests that the builders were operating under principles alien to what we associate with pharaonic legacy, perhaps a culture that valued the monument itself more than personal recognition, or one that intended the work to stand outside of time, anonymous and eternal. This interpretation opens the door to broader questions. Could the builders have been a pre-dynastic society with different customs, one whose records and language are now lost? Could the monuments be part of a tradition erased by time, climate change, or conquest? If so, then what we see on the Giza Plateau is not the beginning of Egyptian civilization, but the end of something older. What complicates the matter further is that Egypt, as we know it, rose already mature. Its earliest dynasties demonstrate advanced understanding of art, engineering, astronomy, and administration. There is no gradual developmental arc visible in the archaeological record. The tools and styles appear suddenly, with precision and uniformity. This abrupt emergence has puzzled scholars for decades. If the Great Pyramid and Sphinx predate the known dynastic period, they may represent that missing prelude, a chapter that was skipped in the traditional narrative. None of this is to say that ancient Egypt did not achieve incredible things. It did. The civilization lasted over 3,000 years, developed a rich spiritual philosophy, and left behind monuments that still inspire awe. But the silence of its greatest monument must be addressed. It must be weighed, not as a conspiracy, but as data and absence that demands explanation. History is built on patterns. In Egypt, that pattern is clear. Kings claimed their works, priests recorded their rituals, scribes documented their rulers. The Great Pyramid and the Sphinx break that pattern. They exist outside of it. That break may be an anomaly, or it may be a clue. Until definitive evidence is found, we must leave space for doubt, not to erase history, but to refine it. The lack of attribution on the Giza monuments is not proof of alternate origins, but it is an open question, one that invites scrutiny, invites humility, and invites the possibility that history, like the stones of the Sphinx, holds more than one layer. And so we are left with two monuments, vast, silent, and unclaimed. They do not name their builders. They do not ask to be understood. They simply endure. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands not only as a monument to ancient ambition, but as an enduring question about what early human civilizations were truly capable of. Rising more than 140 meters into the air and covering 13 acres of solid limestone and granite, it remains one of the most remarkable engineering achievements in history. And yet, the deeper one examines its construction, the more unsettling the story becomes, not for what is there, but for what seems to be missing. Constructed from an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, the Great Pyramid is thought to weigh over 6 million tons. Many of these blocks range between 2 and 15 tons each, with some granite stones in the interior weighing as much as 70 to 80 tons. These stones were not placed haphazardly. The base of the pyramid is leveled to within a precision of 2 centimeters. Across 230 meters, an accuracy difficult to achieve even with modern surveying equipment. The sides of the base are almost perfectly aligned with the cardinal points of the compass: north, south, east, and west, despite the builders supposedly lacking compasses or satellite imaging. This is not primitive work. It is meticulous, systematic, and exact. According to conventional history, all of this was achieved using simple tools: copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sleds, and human labor. There is no physical evidence that the ancient Egyptians had access to iron tools during Khufu's reign. Copper, while workable, is too soft to cut through the harder limestone, let alone granite. And yet, the grand gallery within the pyramid, a sloping passageway nearly 9 meters high, is lined with precision-cut granite beams. Each beam was placed with a tolerance so tight that a razor blade cannot easily fit between the stones. The question then arises, how were these materials quarried, transported, and assembled with such high precision using Bronze Age technology? To begin, consider the quarrying process. The granite blocks in the king's chamber were sourced from Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers to the south. Moving blocks of this size, across such a distance, in large quantities, through desert terrain and the Nile's shifting currents, would be a feat even with cranes and trucks. Yet the official narrative suggests they were floated downstream on wooden barges, maneuvered into place with ropes, manpower, and patience. While this may be theoretically possible for small stones, it becomes exponentially more difficult as the weight increases. The logistics of moving even one 70-ton block would be complex, moving dozens and positioning them inside a narrow passage. Deep within the pyramid borders on the improbable. Once at Giza, these blocks would need to be hauled up the structure as it rose in height. The current theory posits a long earthen ramp, winding its way around the pyramid, perhaps supported by bricks or packed sand. But such a ramp, especially one sturdy enough to support the weight of multi-ton stones, would have required nearly as much material as the pyramid itself. No remnants of such a massive structure have ever been found. Its complete disappearance, given the scale required, is another anomaly. The setting of the stones raises further questions. Modern builders rely on leveling tools, steel frameworks, and laser measurement to ensure uniformity. In contrast, the builders of the Great Pyramid achieved their precision with tools made of copper and stone. And yet, the base is nearly perfectly level. The joints between many blocks are so tight that mortar was not functionally necessary. Though a gypsum-based mortar was indeed used in some areas, another indicator of attention to long-term structural integrity. Inside the pyramid, engineering feats continue. The ascending passage and the grand gallery both show remarkable geometric consistency. The gallery itself serves not just as a corridor, but as part of the pyramid's complex internal architecture. Its corbelled ceiling relieves pressure from above, preventing collapse. The alignment and symmetry are such that the slightest deviation would have compromised the entire structure. And yet it holds, unyielding after thousands of years. Above the king's chamber are 5 so-called relieving chambers, designed to distribute the immense weight of stone above the chamber itself. The granite beams in these chambers weigh up to 80 tons and are stacked horizontally in layers. Their placement required not just brute force, but a knowledge of load-bearing mechanics. The function of these chambers was not decorative, they were structural, indicating an understanding of compression and force distribution. There is no evidence of trial and error. It was executed correctly the first time. One of the more curious aspects of the pyramid's design is its internal air shafts. 2 narrow shafts extend from the king's chamber and 2 from the so-called queen's chamber, angling upward toward the exterior. Initially believed to be ventilation shafts, their orientation suggests a deeper purpose. The northern shaft of the king's chamber points toward the ancient position of the pole star, while the southern shaft aligns with the belt of Orion. These alignments indicate not only advanced astronomical awareness, but deliberate design. They are not functional in a practical sense. They are symbolic, mathematical, and precise. The builders of the pyramid also displayed remarkable knowledge of geometry. The ratio of the pyramid's base to its height approximates the value of pi. The slope of its sides reflects the golden ratio. Whether intentional or coincidental, these proportions show a sophisticated understanding of mathematical relationships that are not clearly evident in other Egyptian works of the time. The traditional explanation for these achievements centers on scale thousands of workers, decades of labor, and strict coordination. Ancient accounts suggest a workforce of 20,000 to 100,000 men, organized into rotating crews. But this raises logistical concerns. Housing, feeding, managing, and coordinating such a massive labor force without modern communication or infrastructure would require a level of administrative capability for which we have little evidence. Furthermore, the pyramid's completion within a reign of just over 20 years implies a construction rate of roughly 1 block every 2.5 minutes day and night, without pause for 2 decades. This does not include time for quarrying, shaping, or transporting the blocks. To be clear, this is not an argument for impossibility, but it is a recognition of extraordinary complexity that invites deeper scrutiny. Could the Egyptians have built the Great Pyramid with the tools and techniques we currently attribute to them? Perhaps, but the margins are tight, the assumptions many, and the evidence incomplete. Some suggest the Egyptians had access to lost techniques or tools, now unknown to us. Others posit that the monuments were the cumulative product of earlier knowledge passed down, modified, and refined over time. The idea of the pyramids as inherited structures has gained attention in recent years, especially when considering the lack of inscriptions and the weathering patterns on surrounding monuments. If these structures were already present in some form before Khufu's reign, his role may have been one of renovation, not creation. This possibility challenges not just Egyptology, but broader narratives of human progress. It suggests that early cultures may have achieved technological heights now underestimated, or that such knowledge once existed and was later lost. In either case, it expands the scope of inquiry. It tells us to look not only at what was built, but how and when. The Great Pyramid has no internal lighting, yet passages are straight and consistent. There are no soot marks on the ceilings, no evidence of oil lamps or open flame. How did workers navigate deep interior corridors without fire? Some theorize the use of copper mirrors or polished reflective surfaces. Others consider the possibility of chemical lighting, although no physical residue has been found to support such ideas. Additionally, there is the matter of consistency. Subsequent pyramids built within the same era fail to match the precision of Khufu's monument. The Pyramid of Khufu is nearly as large but lacks the same structural refinement. The Pyramid of Menkaure, smaller still, shows signs of corner cutting and incomplete finish. Later pyramids, such as those at Saqqara and Dashur, are architecturally simpler. If pyramid building was a linear progression, why do we not see further refinement? Why does the most advanced and perfect pyramid appear first? This anomaly suggests either a leap in knowledge or a different origin entirely. The technology, expertise, and ambition displayed at Giza do not appear to have been matched again, not just in Egypt, but anywhere in the ancient world. That doesn't mean it's beyond explanation, but it does mean that the traditional narrative is not sufficient on its own. In the end, the Great Pyramid remains both a masterpiece and a mystery. Every stone bears witness to something more than utility. The alignment, the precision, the symmetry, and the sheer magnitude of the structure push against the boundaries of what we associate with early Bronze Age civilization. They invite us not to accept, but to question, not to dismiss, but to look again. Whether built by Khufu's engineers, inherited from an earlier epoch, or the product of forgotten methods, the pyramid challenges the limits of our understanding. And in doing so, it fulfills its deepest purpose, not merely to endure, but to make us wonder. Amid the desert sands of Giza, the Great Pyramid stands not only as a feat of construction, but as a structure that appears to encode principles of mathematics, geometry, and planetary science. Beyond its sheer size and architectural ambition, it presents a puzzle. How did its builders come to embed advanced mathematical constants, precise global positioning, and potential knowledge of the planet's geophysical dimensions into a monument? Constructed over 4 millennia ago? One of the most debated elements lies in the proportions of the pyramid itself. The perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base, divided by its height, yields a value remarkably close to 2 pi, an expression of the mathematical constant pi. The numbers are striking. Each side of the base measures approximately 230.4 meters. Multiplied by 4, the perimeter is 921.6 meters. Divide that by its original height, around 146.6 meters, and the result is 6.283, virtually indistinguishable from 6.283185. This ratio suggests that the pyramid could be a geometrical representation of a hemisphere's circumference to its radius. In essence, a circular idea expressed in a square and triangular form. But pi is not the only constant hidden in the pyramids. Geometry, the angle of inclination, approximately 51.84 degrees, produces a ratio between half the base and the height that aligns closely with phi, the golden ratio. The golden ratio, known as phi and approximately equal to 1.618, has fascinated architects, artists, and mathematicians for centuries. It's a proportion frequently observed in natural phenomena, from the spirals of galaxies to the growth patterns of plants. Its deliberate appearance in the pyramid's proportions raises the question: were the builders encoding aesthetic and mathematical harmony intentionally, or did they stumble into it by chance? The presence of both pi and phi in one structure is not easily dismissed as coincidence. The statistical odds of encoding both constants accidentally through trial and error stone cutting is infinitesimal. These proportions do not just emerge organically from arbitrary dimensions. They require calculation, foresight, and a command of abstract mathematical thinking. In modern history, the formal definitions of pi and phi arrived only after centuries of mathematical evolution. That the Great Pyramid embodies them suggests either an independent discovery or an inherited knowledge far in advance of its time. Beyond its geometry, the pyramid's placement is equally provocative. The Great Pyramid is situated near the geographic center of Earth's landmass. If one calculates the lines of latitude and longitude, it rests at a point from which the most land extends outward in all directions. This is not the geographic center of the Earth itself, but of its land distribution. Such positioning would have required a global understanding of geography, a cartographic feat seemingly beyond any known civilization of the 3rd millennium BCE. Moreover, the dimensions of the pyramid seem to correlate with the planet's own measurements. When the pyramid's height is multiplied by 43,200, a number connected to the precession of the equinoxes, the result approximates Earth's polar radius, roughly 6,356 kilometers. Similarly, the base perimeter of 921.6 meters multiplied by 43,200 yields a figure near 40,030 kilometers, matching Earth's equatorial circumference. The factor 43,200 itself is not arbitrary. It is derived from the precessional cycle of Earth's axial rotation, which takes approximately 25,920 years to complete one cycle. Divide that by 600 and you get 43.2 scaled to Earth. It becomes 43,200. Why would this astronomical constant be tied to a terrestrial monument unless its creators understood both? If this is intentional, it is not merely architecture. It is cosmology expressed in stone. The scale is so vast and the correspondence so exact that it challenges our assumptions about what the builders knew and when they knew it. The Great Pyramid of Giza is often examined through the lens of engineering, archaeology, and architecture. But among its most enduring enigmas is the sky. More than a structure of stone, the pyramid may also be a celestial instrument designed not only to last through the ages, but to mirror the heavens above. This idea is not based in mysticism or symbolic interpretation alone, but in measurable alignments, consistent geometries, and astronomical precision. It begins with the stars and the shafts that point toward them. Within the Great Pyramid are 4 narrow channels known as air shafts, 2 leading from the King's Chamber and 2 from the so-called Queen's Chamber. These shafts are not large, enough for a human to pass through, and they do not serve a clear structural or ventilation function. Instead, they rise at precise angles, intersecting the pyramid's geometry at slanted paths, and ultimately open or nearly open to the pyramid's exterior. When their angles are projected skyward, something remarkable is revealed. They align with specific stars. Or more accurately, they aligned with specific stars at a particular moment in the distant past around 2450 BCE. The southern shaft of the King's Chamber is oriented toward the belt of Orion, while the northern shaft points to what was then the pole star Thuban in the constellation Draco. Similarly, the Queen's Chamber shafts are thought to align with Sirius and Kokub. These are not random alignments. They reflect a sophisticated awareness of the night sky, one capable of accounting for precession, the slow, cyclical wobble of Earth's axis that causes the apparent position of stars to shift over thousands of years. Precession is not easily observed within a single lifetime. It moves the heavens at a rate of about 1 degree every 72 years. Over centuries, the cumulative effect becomes noticeable, but it takes millennia for a star's position to shift dramatically against the backdrop of the celestial sphere. That the shafts align with the sky as it appeared in the 25th century BCE suggests not only that the pyramid was built at that time, but that its designers were aware of the heavens as a dynamic system, one that changes slowly, predictably, and rhythmically. To understand this is to grasp the heart of the mystery. How did a culture with no telescopes, no advanced optics, and no known mathematical system capable of calculating precessional drift embed such knowledge into their most sacred architecture? The constellation Orion was significant to the ancient Egyptians. It was associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection. Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, was linked to Isis, his consort. These were not abstract religious symbols. They were woven into Egyptian cosmology, death rituals, and even agricultural cycles. The heliacal rising of Sirius, which coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile, marked the beginning of the Egyptian New Year. It was a calendar system based not on lunar months, but on stellar movements. But what elevates the pyramids' alignments beyond mythology is the accuracy with which they were implemented. The builders did not simply align the structure vaguely to the stars. They engineered the shafts to capture celestial targets at the right angles and elevations. Such precision implies not just stargazing, but systematic observation across generations. Patterns would have to be tracked, logged, passed down, and eventually encoded into architecture. This is not the work of a single priest or pharaoh, but of a culture deeply invested in long-term astronomical tracking. Some researchers argue that the shafts and alignments could have been symbolic approximations. But the engineering contradicts that. A symbolic shaft need not be angled precisely. A decorative alignment does not require consistency across multiple channels. These were difficult to cut, narrow, angled, and hidden within thick stone walls. Their very existence speaks to intention, not artistic flourish. More compelling is the wider context of stellar alignments in ancient Egypt. The pyramids themselves are laid out on the Giza Plateau in a pattern some believe corresponds to the three stars of Orion's belt: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The two larger pyramids, Khufu and Kafur, are offset slightly from the third, smaller pyramid of Menkaure, mimicking the stellar arrangement in the sky. This theory, while debated, has drawn interest for its geometric and positional parallels. If deliberate, it suggests that the entire Giza complex was conceived not only as a royal necropolis, but as a terrestrial mirror of the heavens. This concept is not unique to Egypt. Across cultures, ancient builders constructed sites in alignment with solar, lunar, and stellar events. From Stonehenge in Britain to Teotihuacan in Mexico, sacred architecture often reflects the rhythms of the cosmos. What sets the Great Pyramid apart is the complexity of the implementation. It is not just the sun or moon being tracked, but the deep stars' fixed points of light whose shifts can only be noticed over long spans of time. This is astronomical knowledge of a higher order. Could the ancient Egyptians have understood precession? Mainstream scholarship remains skeptical. The first formal identification of precession in the historical record comes from the Greek astronomer Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE, 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. Yet the pyramid builders' apparent anticipation of stellar drift challenges this timeline. Even without understanding the mechanics of axial wobble, repeated observations across centuries could have revealed the slow displacement of stars. In a culture where time was measured in dynasties and eternity was a central concept, the sky may have served as both clock and calendar. The ancient Egyptians measured time in Sothic cycles, based on the periodic reappearance of Sirius. This cyclical view of the cosmos, along with their obsession with the afterlife and rebirth, made the sky a repository of divine order. Aligning tombs and temples with the stars was not merely symbolic, it was an act of synchronization with the eternal. The pyramid, as the ultimate funerary monument, may have been designed to connect the pharaoh not just with gods, but with the machinery of the universe itself. Further evidence of this connection is found in texts like the pyramid text inscriptions, found in later pyramids that describe the pharaoh ascending to the stars, joining Orion, becoming one with the imperishable. While these texts postdate the Great Pyramid by a century or more, they echo a belief system that may have been practiced long before it was written down. The architecture in this case precedes the scripture. The pyramid speaks the language of the stars even before the priests began to write it. And yet, the sophistication of the alignments continues to puzzle modern investigators. The margins of error are minimal. The shafts are angled within fractions of degrees. The pyramid's base is aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy, deviating by less than 1/15 of a degree. This level of precision requires consistent, long-term observation of stellar risings and settings, the tracking of fixed points over time, and an architectural system capable of translating those observations into physical form. Some have proposed that such precision could have been achieved using sighting instruments, simple tools based on plumb lines, gnomons, or slotted sight blocks. These devices, when used methodically over long periods, can detect minute changes in star positions. While primitive by today's standards, they can be surprisingly effective. Still, this assumes a dedicated observational tradition, maintained for generations with the purpose of aligning stone to sky. This is where the real mystery lies, not in the tools, but in the intention. The pyramid is not an isolated case of architectural brilliance. It is part of a wider pattern of cosmic architecture. It suggests that the ancient Egyptians were not merely building monuments for power or posterity, but designing instruments of alignment, links between heaven and earth, between the mortal and the eternal. If this is true, then the Great Pyramid is not just a tomb or a symbol of pharaonic authority. It is a message, a fixed point on the surface of the earth that points outward toward the stars, toward cycles that repeat across tens of thousands of years. It is a kind of clock that does not count minutes, but millennia. A map that charts not land, but time. And if the builders knew that the stars would shift, if they understood that today's pole star would not be tomorrow's, then they also understood legacy in a way that transcends dynasty. They knew that kingdoms crumble, languages die, and stone erodes, but the sky remains. By embedding their knowledge in alignments with celestial objects, they reached beyond their own age. They designed monuments that could be read not only by their descendants, but by anyone, anywhere, who could still look up. We may never fully understand how they acquired this knowledge, or how it was calculated and preserved. But the evidence stands, carved into limestone and granite, unyielding to time. The pyramid does not claim knowledge, it demonstrates it. Silently, but with geometric certainty, it traces a line from Earth to Orion, from human hands to the heavens. And in doing so, it reminds us that the builders of Giza may not have been simply ancient, but timeless. From the outside, the Great Pyramid of Giza presents itself as a timeless monument, solid, symmetrical, and silent. Its imposing geometry suggests authority, legacy, and endurance. For centuries, it has been identified as a tomb, built to house the remains of Pharaoh Khufu. Yet step inside, and that narrative begins to falter. The interior of the pyramid tells a different story, one not of death and ritual, but of geometry, resonance, and inexplicable design choices. It raises a question more complex than it first appears. What truly was the Great Pyramid for? At the heart of this question lies the so-called King's Chamber. Deep within the structure, above a narrow ascending passage and through the soaring Grand Gallery, this rectangular granite chamber stands as the central room of the entire pyramid. It is carved from over 300 tons of rose granite blocks transported from Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers to the south. The chamber itself is stark. No hieroglyphs, no painted walls, no carved inscriptions, no altar, no symbolic art, just smooth granite surfaces and a single object, a rectangular stone box. This box, long called a sarcophagus, has been central to the assumption that the pyramid is a tomb. Yet this so-called sarcophagus tells us almost nothing. It is not engraved, it has no lid, it contains no mummy, no grave goods, no evidence of funerary activity. Unlike other pharaonic burials, which are richly adorned with texts, artifacts, canopic jars, and ritual inscriptions, the king's chamber offers only a hollow box and silence. The room, as it stands today, is empty literally and symbolically. When Napoleon entered the chamber in 1799, he found no remains. Later explorers found no treasures, no bones, no remnants of embalming. Some have argued that the contents were looted in antiquity, but this claim is speculative. No broken fragments, discarded items, or signs of forced entry were recorded. The chamber does not appear to have been sealed or desecrated. It simply appears unused, at least in the way we understand royal tombs, the absence of a body or burial. Artifacts is not a trivial oversight. In ancient Egyptian culture, funerary architecture was deeply ceremonial. Tombs were adorned with texts to guide the deceased through the afterlife. Chambers were filled with offerings, amulets, and instructions. For resurrection, even minor nobles and commoners received symbolic burials. That the pyramid believed to be the greatest tomb ever constructed contains none of these elements is an enduring contradiction. But the anomalies of the king's chamber do not end with its contents. The room's acoustic properties have drawn the attention of scientists and researchers for decades. The granite walls, ceiling, and the box itself exhibit resonant qualities. When struck or sounded, the room vibrates at distinct frequencies. These are not random echoes, they are harmonic and consistent. The chamber functions almost like an instrument. Some visitors have noted that vocal tones within the space produce sustained reverberations, as if the room were designed to amplify sound. This acoustic behavior has led to deeper inquiries. Granite contains quartz, a piezoelectric material. When quartz crystals are compressed, they generate a small electric charge. This property is the foundation of numerous modern technologies, from watches to sonar devices. Within the king's chamber, millions of quartz crystals are encased in a pressure-intensive environment, lined up within massive blocks, carefully cut and fitted, under thousands of tons of overlying stone. Was this intentional? Was the chamber designed to harness vibrational energy, to convert sound or movement into something else? This idea gives rise to a controversial but increasingly discussed theory that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb at all, but a machine and energy device engineered to generate or manipulate resonance. Proponents of this theory point to several features. First is the chamber's shape and dimensions, which are consistent with known resonant frequencies. The box inside the chamber is not centered, but slightly offset. Some believe this offset is necessary to produce or direct specific vibrational patterns. Secondly, the presence of relieving chambers above the king's chamber. 5 successive layers of stone beams has traditionally been interpreted as structural, but others see them as resonance chambers, each contributing to a harmonic function. The Grand Gallery, with its corbelled ceiling and step structure, may also serve more than a passageway. Its geometry allows for vertical echoing of sound, and its design funnels energy upward toward the king's chamber. If air or sound were channeled through the gallery, it could serve to activate the chamber's acoustic potential. Some have even suggested that the queen's chamber lower in the pyramid, and once connected by narrow shafts, may have played a complementary role in such a system. One of the more radical extensions of this idea suggests that the pyramid functioned as a form of harmonic resonance generator, pulling energy from natural vibrations of the Earth itself. This may sound speculative, but Earth does produce low-frequency vibrations known as the Schumann resonances. These naturally occurring electromagnetic waves circle the planet and interact with the ionosphere. In theory, a structure tuned to those frequencies could resonate sympathetically. Some believe the pyramid was such a structure, a harmonic interface between the planet and an unknown technology. Of course, these ideas lie outside traditional Egyptology. Most scholars remain firmly within the tomb theory, emphasizing historical records, cultural context, and the symbolic role of pyramids as stairways to the heavens. Yet, even within that context, the Great Pyramid remains unique. It's internal. Design differs markedly from later pyramids, which feature more elaborate burial elements. It lacks inscriptions, art, and decoration. It contains chambers with no apparent purpose, shafts with no clear function, and construction precision that exceeds what was necessary for burial. The question then is not whether the pyramid was advanced. We know it was. The question is why it was built in the way it was. Why transport hundreds of tons of granite to create an empty chamber? Why design shafts aligned to stars, but too narrow for human use? Why employ materials with known energetic properties arranged in specific geometries? Even if the pyramid was not an energy machine in the technological sense, it may have been designed to interact with energy symbolically or spiritually. In ancient traditions, sound, light, and geometry were not merely physical phenomena, they were expressions of cosmic law. The builders may have believed that aligning with certain frequencies or harmonics would enhance spiritual transformation. In that sense, the pyramid could be seen as a temple of frequency, a place where the soul, like sound, could resonate toward a higher state. But if that is the case, why is there no evidence of ritual use? No artifacts, no writings, no indications of how the structure was meant to be used. The absence of evidence invites caution, but it also preserves the mystery. Perhaps what we are looking for never existed in material form. Perhaps the pyramid was never meant to be entered by the living at all. Or perhaps it was used in a way that left no trace, no tools, no texts, no icons. Only stone. To some, the theory of the pyramid as a machine feels speculative, even fringe. But it arises from a logical question. If this was a tomb, why does it not behave like one? Why is it acoustically responsive? Why are its chambers empty? Why is the design so complex for a structure meant to house a single body? Ultimately, the Great Pyramid resists easy classification. It may have been a tomb, it may have been a temple, or it may have been something else entirely, an engine of resonance, a monument to frequency, or a legacy of a forgotten science. Its purpose remains debated, but its silence speaks volumes. In the king's chamber, there is no inscription, no voice, only vibration. In the heart of Egypt's layered past, amidst hieroglyphs, crumbled walls, and eroded monuments, there exists a single inscription that has quietly challenged one of the most foundational assumptions of mainstream Egyptology. It's not carved inside the Great Pyramid or on the walls of the king's chamber. It doesn't appear in royal tombs or in temple reliefs praising pharaohs. It is alone, steely, modest in size, incomplete in condition, and largely ignored by academic consensus, yet its message is startling. It claims that Khufu, the very pharaoh long credited with building the Great Pyramid, did not build it at all. This artifact is known as the inventory, stela. Discovered in the 19th century near the Temple of Isis on the Giza Plateau. The stela is carved in limestone and dates from the 26th dynasty, roughly 600 BCE, over 1,800 years after the reign of Khufu. It is a much later artifact, and for this reason alone, it has been widely dismissed by scholars. But its content has attracted attention for decades. The stela recounts a tale from Egypt's distant past, naming Khufu as a central figure, yet not as a builder or creator. Rather, as a restorer. The text describes Khufu making offerings to the goddess Isis and visiting a temple already standing near the Great Pyramid. It speaks of Khufu discovering a monument buried in sand, a monument identified as the Sphinx. He is said to have uncovered and restored the image of the god Harmachis, which scholars interpret as an early name for the Sphinx. This wording carries enormous implications. If Khufu restored the Sphinx, he did not build it. If he unearthed the monument, it must have already been ancient in his own time. The stela goes further. It implies that the Temple of Isis, and by association, the pyramid complex around it, was already in place before Khufu's reign. That these were not new constructions, but but sacred structures inherited from an earlier age. According to this account, the Great Pyramid was not a project initiated by Khufu, but a relic that stood before him, already venerated, already partially buried by the desert. This directly contradicts the dominant view that Khufu was the mastermind behind the Great Pyramid, commissioning its design and overseeing its construction during his reign around 2500 BCE. That view is based on relatively scant evidence. A cartouche containing Khufu's name found in a hidden chamber above the king's chamber, possibly added by workers. No inscription inside the pyramid itself proclaims Khufu as the builder. No grand dedication. No triumphal boasting. Only a single reference found in a place few would have seen. Contrast this with the inventory stela, which despite being a late period document, openly states that Khufu encountered sacred structures already in place and chose to restore them. It even refers to the pyramid as the House of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, suggesting that the structure had religious significance independent of Khufu's legacy. The phrase implies continuity, not authorship. Critics of the stelas historical value argue that it was created long after Khufu's time and may reflect religious or political agendas rather than historical fact. Egypt's 26th dynasty was a period of revivalism, when older monuments and traditions were reinterpreted or reimagined. They suggest that the stela's authors may have been attempting to link Khufu to the cult of Isis, to validate the temple's importance, or to reframe older myths. These are reasonable cautions, but they do not erase the implications of the text itself. If later Egyptians believed that the Sphinx predated Khufu, where did that belief originate? Oral traditions, lost records, direct knowledge? And if the monument was already ancient by Khufu's era, what does that suggest about the origins of the Giza complex as a whole? The stela's use of restoration language is significant. In ancient Egypt, restoring a monument was an act of reverence. Pharaohs often repaired or expanded existing structures, but they did not claim to build them unless they had. When Khufu is said to have purified or recovered the image of Harmachis, this is not the language of foundation. It is the language of conservation. If this account were fiction or embellishment, it is curious that it would cast one of Egypt's most celebrated kings not as a grand architect, but as a caretaker of a forgotten past. What makes the inventory stela particularly provocative is how neatly it dovetails with other anomalies. The geological evidence on the Sphinx enclosure suggests water erosion implying great age and exposure to rainfall long before dynastic Egypt. The lack of inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid mirrors the absence of authorship one might expect in a repurposed or inherited structure. The acoustic and structural mysteries within the pyramid hint at a function beyond simple burial. The mathematical and astronomical precision of the complex remains unmatched by any structure in Khufu's time or since. Taken alone, the stela might be dismissed as apocryphal or ceremonial. But taken in context, it strengthens a growing pattern that Khufu may have inherited Giza, not constructed it. That he stood among ruins, not blueprints. That he uncovered sacred ground rather than sanctifying it for the first time. It is important to remember that Egypt's historical records are both vast and incomplete. Much of what we know about Khufu comes from later accounts, including Herodotus, who visited Egypt 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. Even in Herodotus's time, the Great Pyramid's true history had already faded into speculation and legend. The inventory stela, despite its late composition, may preserve a memory that even Herodotus lacked, a glimpse into a truth quietly acknowledged by the Egyptians themselves. If this is the case, it invites a revision of the narrative surrounding the Old Kingdom. Khufu's role, rather than initiating the construction of the greatest pyramid, becomes one of preservation. He may have repurposed the structure, aligned it with his own legacy, and adapted it to fit the religious currents of his era. The pyramid may have served multiple functions across centuries, its original purpose long since forgotten by the time Khufu approached it. This reframing does not diminish Khufu's historical importance. On the contrary, it places him in a line of stewards rulers who preserved and reinterpreted the knowledge of an earlier age. It acknowledges that ancient Egyptians, like us, encountered mysteries from their own distant past. They too may have asked, who built this? Why was it made? And how can we honor it? The inventory stela stands today in the Cairo Museum, often passed by without much attention. Its surface is worn, its inscriptions partially damaged, but its message remains intact. It quietly proposes an alternate history, one in which Egypt's most iconic monument was not the pinnacle of a pharaoh's ambition, but a relic of an era already lost to time. The pyramid in this telling is not a starting point, but a survival. Not an origin, but a memory in stone. The story of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx is not just a question of stone and sand. It is also a question of who controls the narrative. As new evidence continues to surface, evidence that challenges established timelines and traditional assumptions, it is often met not with curiosity, but with silence, dismissal, or outright suppression. For over a century, mainstream Egyptology has held firm to a linear view of history, that the pyramids were built during the 4th dynasty by kings like Khufu, as tombs and symbols of royal power. But what happens when the evidence no longer fits that framework? Consider the inventory stela. Despite being a genuine artifact on display in the Cairo Museum, it is routinely dismissed by Egyptologists as late-period fiction. Its reference to Khufu restoring the Sphinx is viewed as religious propaganda or anachronistic mythology. Yet this blanket dismissal avoids deeper inquiry. Why would a stele name Khufu at all if the legend were entirely unfounded? Why does it describe him as a restorer, not a builder? These questions remain unaddressed, not disproven, simply excluded. The geological evidence tells a similar story. Robert Schoch's analysis of water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure suggested the monument had been exposed to heavy rainfall thousands of years before dynastic Egypt. His findings, supported by independent geologists, implied the Sphinx might predate 2500 BCE by several millennia. But this interpretation was quickly rejected by traditionalists, who argued instead for wind erosion, despite the vertical weathering patterns that contradict such a cause. Rather than invite dialogue, the field-closed ranks, astronomical alignments, have met similar resistance. The shafts within the Great Pyramid point to stars as they appeared in 2450 BCE, hinting at precessional awareness. Yet these alignments are often treated as symbolic coincidence, not evidence of advanced observation. Suggestions that the pyramid encodes planetary dimensions or mathematical constants are relegated to fringe speculation, even when they arise from empirical measurements. Perhaps most telling is the treatment of physical access to potentially transformative evidence. Caves beneath the Sphinx, first recorded in ancient texts and rediscovered by modern explorers, have been sealed off. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalies beneath the Giza Plateau voids, chambers, and unexplored structures. But excavation permits are limited, and research is tightly managed by state authorities and academic institutions. The deeper the implications, the more restricted the access. This is not a matter of conspiracy, but of control. Egyptology, like any academic field, is shaped by consensus, tradition, and institutional inertia. Ideas that deviate from the established framework are met with skepticism by default. Yet without open investigation, our understanding of history risks becoming less about discovery and more about preservation, not of monuments, but of a narrative too fragile to challenge. The sands of Egypt may still hide answers, but the greater obstacle may be the unwillingness to ask the questions. The Great Pyramid does not speak. It does not explain. It does not boast. It does not remember aloud. It stands in absolute silence, a silence more powerful than any inscription, more enduring than any scroll. Unlike the tombs of pharaohs, it offers no names carved in triumph. Unlike temples, it sings no hymns to the gods. It does not celebrate its builder, because perhaps there was no builder to celebrate. It simply watches and it waits. Everything about the pyramid resists conclusion. It is precise, but purposefully ambiguous. Its form is fixed, yet its meaning slips through the fingers of certainty. It does not confirm the narrative. It questions it. It does not anchor history. It floats just beyond it. It does not offer answers. It poses a single, profound challenge. Understand me, if you can. What if the pyramids are not creations of their time, but relics of a forgotten one? What if they were already old when Egypt began? What if the architects who raised them disappeared long before the first hieroglyph was scratched into stone? What if the very foundation of civilization we celebrate is itself built on ruins, on memory, on inheritance? These are not easy questions. They demand that we rethink what we know, not just about Egypt, but about the whole human story. They force us to confront the possibility that our history is incomplete, that beneath the record lies a deeper record, buried not only in sand, but in silence. And that some monuments do not commemorate the past, they conceal it not. So what else have we inherited without knowing it? What other legacies lie in plain sight, unread and unexplained? The Great Pyramid is not an answer, it is an invitation. A monument not to what was, but to what was lost. To what remains. If this has you questioning everything you've learned about ancient history, hit subscribe. Because the past is whispering, and the pyramids are only the beginning.